This is video 1 of 2 that you need to do this particular homework assignment. Today we're going to learn about how to obtain information from or about the graph of a function. I'm going to show you 2 examples showing from and then one showing about. Okay, so let's do the from example first. By the way, the stuff up here is what you should get out of this lesson, and you can read it later. I'm going to do this here. Example 1, obtaining information from the graph of a function. Okay, so you're provided a graph and then there's some questions. Before we get started, I want to tell you this. You're going to see this in the problem. Whenever you see f of x, I want you to associate that with the variable y. Okay, so let's get started. How often does the line y equals 3 intersect the graph? So y equals 3 is a horizontal line. In fact, whenever you see y equals a number, that's a horizontal line. So please remember that. So if I'm going to figure out how many times that line intersects this given graph, I better draw it. So there's 3, so y equals 3 looks something like that roughly. I can't draw so well. Well, it intersects it in 4 spots. That's what I was doing there. 4 is the answer to A. Let's go to B. For what values of x does f of x, that means y, equals 0? So let's see. Okay, so y equals 0 in 1 spot, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 spots. We're asked to list the x values where this happens. So I thought I'd get a little messy, so I instead had written it earlier. So I'm going to steal that and put it right in. Okay, and let's check on that to see that it makes sense. Well, these are the x values I listed, those places. In particular, I see some sort of strange looking things, maybe 2.5 and 7.5. Let's see that that makes sense. Here's x equals 2, and that location over there is 3 right in between, so that happens to be 2.5. And over here we have a similar thing. This is 7, and then to the right of that, right after that, is 7.5. So anyhow, these are the x values where y equals 0. Next question, C. Is y evaluated at x equals 4 positive or negative? So we need to go to x equals 4, and we can look at the y value when x is 4. Well, it's positive. It's above the x-axis. So the answer is positive. Okay, what are the x-intercepts? So I'd already written it down here. I'm going to move it next to it. The x-intercepts are the y values where the graph crosses the x-axis. It turns out we had already looked at that when we did part B, because we were looking at the x values where the graph hit the x-axis. So the answer to D is the x-intercepts. Well, those are those 8 places. So I'm going to say C part B rather than write it out again. That's the answer. It's those 8 numbers. E, what is the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept, I already written that out too. Though that is really the y value, it should say. The y value where the graph crosses the y-axis. And I'm saying it's a one value only if you're talking about a function, because if a graph crossed the y-axis more than once, it wouldn't be a function. So the y-intercept for a function, there's really going to be 1, if any. Okay? So let's see, when does the graph cross the y-axis? Well, it crosses it right there. This is the y-axis. It crosses at y equals 0. So the y-intercept is the y value where the graph crosses the y-axis, and that was at y equals 0 for ours. Okay, on to the second example of 2. Now we're not handed a graph, but we are asked to do this. Obtain information about the graph of a function. Okay, so now we're provided a function, and we have to answer questions about the function and interpret the graph. So here's what it says. Is the point x equals 3, y equals 14 on the graph of f? So the way you do this is substitute x is 3 and see if you get y is 14 out of that. So when you do this, you get the following. That's 18 minus 3 minus 1, so 18 minus 4 is 14. So it did work. We got y equals 14, so the answer is yes. Okay, next question. If x is 2, what is y? Okay, so we're going to do f of 2 and see. So we're going to get 2 times 2 squared minus, that's 8, minus 2 minus 1. 8 minus 3 is 5. That's the answer to that part. That's f of x at x equals 2. We didn't answer this question though. What point is on the graph of f? So a point is always x comma y. I just wrote it as p. So in this case, x was 2 and y was 5. So that's the answer to that second question, 2 comma 5. Okay, now we're on to part C. Now it's saying if y equals -1, what is x? So I'm going to let y equal -1, and I need to solve for x when I do that. So if you notice, I have -1 on both sides of the equation, so I can add it to both sides, and when I do, they're eliminated. They're canceled out. So now I'm left with a 0 on the left equals 2x squared minus x. So when you have a situation where you have equals 0 and you have x written in repeated locations like that, then you should factor. So I'm going to factor x out, and I'm left with 2x minus 1. So in order for this product to equal 0, it means either x equals 0 or 2x minus 1 equals 0. So you need to solve for x in this equation now, and you get out x is a half. So the answer to part C is actually two answers. There's two x values that cause the function value to equal -1. Those are the two answers. Okay, now we're on to D. List the x-intercepts, if any, on the graph. So earlier we learned that the x-intercepts are the locations, the x locations, where the graph crosses the x-axis. But you're not given a graph here, so the way you do this one is you're going to set y equal to 0 and solve for x. And I had written that down so you don't get lost right here. So let's do that. Let's do exactly what that says. To get an x-intercept, you do this. Set y equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so I need to find the function. So this is going to be 0 now, and I'm going to write that out. So 0 equals 2x squared minus x minus 1. I'm going to solve for x now. So the way you do this is a trinomial. Try to factor it. It does factor. So we get this and that, 2x squared, and then I have a 1 and a 1. Well, I have to figure out the sign. The sign here on this one's going to be negative and the other one's going to be positive. Let's see why. 2x squared, x, negative 2x squared, they add to negative x. And then I have also 1 times -1. So that's the correct factorization. So we need to solve this equation. We're getting two roots. Either 2x plus 1 equals 0, in other words, x equals -1/2 is one solution, or either x minus 1 equals 0, which means that x is 1. So those are the two answers. There's two intercepts, and that's what we get. On to the next question. This is the last one. List the y-intercept, if any, on the graph of f. So this is just the opposite. This is you do the following. You set x equal to 0 and solve for y. So I wrote that down. So I'm going to put that in again. And we will now do that. We'll do what I wrote. Set x equal to 0 and solve for y. That's going to give you the y-intercept. So remember, the equation was y equals. So I'm going to find it by doing y equals now 0 plugged in, 0 plugged in again. So I'm going to get 2 times 0 squared, which is 0. Next one is 0. So I'm left with -1. That's the y-intercept. So that's it for this lesson. So you should be able to do the problems, the first couple of problems. Okay.